Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets, how to increase your market business success while providing people with fresh food. Farmers markets are essential. Whether you're a farmers market manager or a small farmer or food maker selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast. This week, we have the pleasure of speaking with financial consultant and Intense Conference presenter, Sarah Delevan of Sarah Delevan Consulting and the Good Food CFO podcast about a profit-first approach to budgeting for your farmers market business. Hey everyone, I'm one of your hosts, Bridget Myers. I'm a longtime farmers market manager and education coordinator at Farmers Market Pros.
And I'm Kat Fields-White, Director of San Diego Markets, still an active Farmers Market Manager and consultant, founder of Farmers Market Pros, and host of the Farmers Market Pros community.
And I'm Justine Marzoni-Mead, Tent Talk producer and marketing director for Farmers Market Pros.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by Gusto. Whether you have a team of 2 or a larger group of employees, Gusto makes it easy to process payroll, support your HR needs, and even coordinate insurance and benefits. Their system is easy to manage online and comes at a reasonable price. We use it ourselves, so it's easy to sing their praises. Good help can be hard to find nowadays, and making payroll and benefits easy is one way to keep employees happy. Click the Gusto logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com to get started today.
Welcome back to Tent Talk, everybody. This week, we're welcoming back Sarah Delevan of Sarah Delevan Consulting and the Good Food CFO podcast. We first spoke with Sarah on Tent Talk back in 2018, and since then, she's presented numerous times at our annual Intense Conference. Sarah is a financial coach with a knack for understanding, diagnosing, and improving the financial performance of food businesses. From ingredient sourcing to product and menu pricing to building scalable systems for long-term success, she can see what's going on in a business's day-to-day operations just as clearly as she can see the big picture. She's a wealth of knowledge, and we are so glad to have her back on our podcast. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you for having me back. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I always love talking with you.
It's good to see you. I saw Sarah at the Intense Conference in March.
Yeah, and we saved her to the very end. We're like, you have to stay the whole conference.
That's right. Take us home.
which I have to say was such a pleasure, and that it really kind of reconnected me to, I don't want to say my roots in a sense, but like my roots in the food industry. So I left the Intense Conference with such a rejuvenated, like overall feeling, but then also connection to the farmers market community. So thank you guys for that. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure having you, and that made a nice block. We did a session on setting fees at markets. Brian Koppel was there with budgeting and budgeting to your why, and he's a funny accounting nerd sort of dude, and so it was a nice balance with Sarah. It was cool and hip. It was great.
Brian is hilarious
to follow.
That's right. Yeah, it's funny. But I have talked to some people that attended the conference just recently, actually, who kept talking about Sarah's presentation and how much it impacted them and made them aware that, this is a business. It's a mission, for sure. We all do it because we believe in fresh food and farmers and food makers, but it also is a business, and part of running a business is making sure that business stays solvent. And that means paying attention to profit being part of the equation.
It's true. And I just have to plug really quick, if you really wanted to come to the conference and you weren't able to make it, we do have all of our conference recordings online for purchase. So after you listen to this podcast and you're desperate for more presentations by Sarah, you can go to farmersmarketpros.com and download or log into the portal where you can view all those recordings.
That's great. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
that's good.
I didn't because I edited them all, and it was a huge undertaking that I will never forget.
It's such a nice thing for people to have, though, and I feel like all this information is so relevant. And in the farmers market space, it's easy to be like, oh, we just have a passion for this job. Let's just do it. But kind of taking it back to well, you can't keep doing it unless you're making a profit on it. So I know we'll get into that kind of stuff, but you're always such a great reminder about that. For listeners who don't know you already from our past episode or your sessions at Intense, can you give us kind of a brief version of your professional background, like what led you to start Sarah Delevan Consulting and your experience with farmers markets?
Yeah. So very briefly, I'll share that I had trouble with acne, really painful acne through my teens and into my 20s, I should say through my 20s. And it was, I think in my mid to late 20s, I found a dermatologist who said, "What are you eating?" which is the first doctor who was like, what are you putting into your body that might have an effect on what's happening with your skin? It was cystic acne. So really hard to kind of solve the problem. And I had taken every pharmaceutical on the market, even the strongest, and everything was a temporary fix. And so meeting her, changing the way that I ate, just sort of cutting out certain foods that weren't good for me and increasing like sort of the veggies and the greens and that kind of stuff had a huge impact on my life. I read Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma at the same time, and my world just exploded. I was joking the other day with someone. I was on the cornucopia website, like I think it was called cornucopia.org or something like that at the time, figuring out what are the best eggs to source and what's the difference between cage free and, free range and like all of these things. I wanted to know everything I could know about where my food came from, how many varieties of zucchini are there, and, how do I cook each of them? And I had a blog that like never went public. It was like a research project for myself. And the more I ate from the farmer's market, the more I realized, I like tomatoes. I've just never had this quality of tomato before. The same with strawberries. And so I was working a corporate job in marketing, but it was like strategic marketing. So still in the numbers world, and wanted to get into farmers markets. And so I tried really hard to volunteer. If you heard the last episode that I was on, Kat so kindly pointed out that like nothing about having an MBA or working in an office for years screams, I'm willing to work hard at a farmer's market. But somebody finally gave in and let me volunteer, and it quickly snowballed into me managing several farmers markets and just really falling in love with the farmers and the ranchers and the fishermen. I started a food business about 2 years later, where our goal was to bring that food outside of the boundary of farmers markets. I really thought that everyone should be eating this food. I ran that business for 2 years with a partner, learned a lot. Some things we'll probably get into here today. And after I closed that business, I went on to be a food buyer, specializing in local, sustainable, regenerative food sourcing for a really large catering company here in LA, continuing to learn about food, but then also getting the insight of like a larger kitchen, purchasing through vendors, but still remaining committed to your goals and to quality. And when I left that job, I went on to consult as a food sourcing manager, really thinking that what I wanted to do was to continue to spread this farm direct food. But what my passion really lied in was the numbers, and that my work really straddled both areas. And one day my husband was like, why do you keep calling yourself a food sourcing consultant when you really are helping people with the numbers? And so he helped me have that aha moment. And the consulting company has evolved over the years. And now we're strictly financial, CFO services and financial coaching.
Wow.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. Full circle.
Full circle.
Yeah. And you said something at the conference that really struck a chord with me when you were talking about your experience operating that business that you ran with your partner, kind of bringing local food outside of the farmers markets, and you sold at a brick and mortar. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did pop-ups. So we would do, cafe pop-ups, and we did delivery. Yeah.
Yeah, but you were talking about how you were so focused on bringing food to people and not really focused on the sustainability of your own business. And you were so mission driven and focused on, bringing this delicious, beautiful, healthful food to all these communities. But because you didn't really emphasize the financials of it, in the long run, you didn't accomplish your mission because you had to close that business. And I don't know, it was just such a perspective shift for me about how these businesses that are doing really, really cool things, also have to think about not only the sustainability of food systems, but the sustainability of their own businesses. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do this thing long term, then you're not really servicing the people that you think that you are, because people are going to fall in love with you. And then eventually, if you have to close your business, they're not going to be able to get the food that they really love anymore.
It turns into a disservice.
Yeah. It's like a tease.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, closing the business was hard for two very specific reasons. One, I had set out to to own and operate a business for a long time. And after 2 years, I had to make the really difficult decision to walk away and to close that business. That's hard in its own right. And then you have your customers who come to you week after week after week, who have been telling you things like, I never cooked before. I didn't think I liked lettuce and salads. Like, we're changing their lives. We're changing the way that they eat food, how they think about food, just like how I had experienced it. And we were interfacing with these people weekly. And then we were disappearing. And the reality is, like, here in Los Angeles, that 10 miles is a far distance to drive to get farmers market food. And if whatever your life circumstance is, if you can't make that drive at a specific time and a specific day of the week, they were going to go without this food. They were going to cease to have it in their lives. And that, I don't want to say killed me, because I'm still going, right? Nothing, only
heartbreaking, though.
Yeah, totally heartbreaking. And really, I think the hardest part about it. And I want to point out that in hindsight, having time to have, gotten away from that point in my life, I can confidently look back and say that I was full of shame around the idea of making money from a mission-driven business. And it was fear-based. And that was the source of the problems, right? We had an article written about us in the LA Times, and it commented about the price of the apples. And the apples were $5 a pound because they cost us $3.50 a pound. And we had to pick them up, transport them, do all the things that are needed to run the business. And quite frankly, we probably should have charged $6 a pound for the apples, right? To make it work. But people's negative thoughts really hung with me. I can't really speak for my partner, but as I recall, it did affect her as well. And we felt ashamed. And I'm sure that the three of you have heard people say this. It's not about the money. I want to do good.
Yeah.
All
right?
the time.
But you could do both.
Exactly. And just like Justine said, like, if you don't make money, if you aren't profitable, like, profit should not be a dirty word, right? If you aren't profitable, you can't fulfill your mission. And so it's important. But I think, something that I like to talk about now is identify if you're saying something around money that seems like altruistic or seems like you're trying to do good, and really ask yourself critically this question of, is that true, or am I afraid to say that I want to make money, or to, you know what I mean? What am I afraid of?
That's powerful.
I think there's a lot to discover there.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're going to talk a lot more about your Profitfirst approach to budgeting and the way that you kind of more of this like mindset in business. But before we get into that, can you just explain, like, what exactly does Sarah Delevan Consulting do? Like, how do you help clients? What are like the services that you provide?
Yeah. So Sarah Delevan Consulting is what we call a food business financial consulting agency. So we work only with food businesses. We strive to work with what we call good food businesses. So clients that are committed to, transparency in terms of sourcing, working with, local businesses, sustainable businesses, from their ingredients to their packaging, right? And they might have a greater mission, that they want to achieve through their business. That's who we're really passionate about working with. We want our grocery store aisles to change, right? For that outside aisle to kind of creep into the middle, if you will. So we provide one-on-one financial consulting services, which some people might know as like a fractional CFO. So I'm a part-time CFO for a number of good food businesses. And that work is really interesting because it's not just about financial reporting, but it's sometimes about, and often about, building customized tools to help them solve problems that present as a financial issue in their business, but really it's, kind of something else. So it's really a really fun sort of all over the business kind of work that I get to do centered on the financials. The other thing that we do, because we want our services to be available to as many good food business owners as possible, is we offer a coaching service. So that's a private community that people can join, where they have access to every resource that I use with my one-on-one clients. And you can interface with me once a week during our office hours. So you can bring your questions, you can bring your financials, you can, you have the community and you have me to really help move you forward and keep going. And then the Good Food CFO part comes in because that's the name of our podcast. Someone referred to me as the Good Food CFO and I latched onto that name. I just thought it was so lovely and I loved it. And when I decided that Instagram and newsletters didn't provide me enough. Clearly I love to talk, right? I can go on and on. It didn't allow me enough of an outlet. I decided to start a podcast. And so that's our podcast name. And we air new episodes every 2 weeks.
I love your podcast, and I've learned things there. And actually, I hooked up with our current accounting firm because you interviewed her on the podcast. So
good,
yeah,
it's funny.
It's a great podcast. So, what types of? I know you said obviously financial issues, but specifically, what are you noticing that some of your clients are looking to solve? And when somebody comes to you, you have such an analytic mind and you're really good at kind of being okay, these are the symptoms that are presenting, but what is this underlying issue? So what are some of the steps that you take in diagnosing these issues, or what are common things that you see come up with your clients?
Such a good question. So we talk a lot about financial sustainability and profitability. And if you don't have those two things in your business, that's a symptom, or they are symptoms of other things not working inside the business, right? Within the operations of the business. So the very first thing we do is what we call a profit assessment. And that is literally taking your financial reports, so your income statement, your balance sheet, and your statement of cash flows. And we put them into this system, this framework that I created over, 7 to 10 years. And what it does for us is it allows us to see very clearly what's not working, either at all or as good as it could be within your business. It's going to identify things like, are your prices too low? Are your ingredient costs too high? Or are your packaging costs too high? Is it simply that your sales volume isn't enough to sustain kind of what you're spending within your business? Are you simply overspending in terms of your operating expenses, right? That is a common problem that we see in a lot of businesses. We are able to see specifically what the labor spend is. And essentially we're looking at the business and all of these very specific things holistically to say, basically, why is the bottom line, that profit line, either a 0 or a negative percentage? And what can we do? Where do we see the opportunity to create change so that that number at the bottom of your P&L is positive, right? And it's I think the easiest way to explain it. And so typically you ask sort of missteps or common mistakes that people make. The big one, and Kat and I have talked about this a lot on podcasts in different places, is that your margins are too low, right? And within that, there's this belief that when we scale, our margins will get better, right? And you guys can't see this, but Kat's shaking her head and laughing as I knew that she would. Yes, sure. When you scale, your margins might increase, meaning your costs might go down, but you might be experiencing inflation, right? Like what's happening right now. The other part of this is that at what point does the scaling, start to improve your margins? It's probably $1 million in revenue or more. So how are you going to sustain your business financially between $0 and $1 million? Point blank, you've got to have margins that work for your business right now. And that's part of what the profit assessment can help us understand is how do we make money today so that we can survive and thrive as a business? And then sure, if we hit $1 million in revenue and we experience improved margins, we can talk about that then.
Yeah, that's such a good point. As somebody that owned a food business, there was definitely okay, these little things all right, if we buy 5,000 jars, our per unit cost goes down. But then guess what? Our apartment was filled with jars and it really impacted our quality of life. And then we considered getting a storage unit for all of our supplies, but then that's an additional cost. So these little things that we thought just buy more, our units or price per unit will go down. But then there's inevitably going to be another cost associated with just scaling up.
Yeah. Scale really only helps on it's kind of some real basic fixed expense.
Yeah.
Maybe amortized over a larger group of items, when you're scaling. But a lot of times if you're going to scale and get really large, you're going to totally wholesale versus direct to consumer. And so you've got your wholesale price is going to come down. So it's actually not going to give you a better margin. It's going to give you a smaller margin on a whole bunch of units, which might figure out in the end. But it's just not as simple as, if I sell more of these, making no money on one, then I'll make money on a bunch. No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think to piggyback on what you just said too, Kat, it's the other common misstep that we see is this 50% margin myth. So when people are selling at farmers markets, right, they are selling direct to consumer. And there is a belief that, okay, if I take my cost to make my product and multiply it by 2, that gives you a 50% margin that you can have a financially successful business. That is applying a one size fits all, formula to your business. And it's not going to work for everyone. Might there be a company that works for? Yes, of course. But not every business is going to be able to succeed with that margin. So you have to figure out, number one, what kind of business do I want to have? Do I want to remain direct to consumer? Do I want to grow in terms of my volume of sales and sell wholesale, right? Like really, you, I think, have to have a direction that you want your business to go. You need to understand where you are right now and what the margins are that are going to work today and into the future to help you succeed. And I don't want to overcomplicate it, but if you're going to take a big risk and make a huge investment of your time, your money, your energy into a business, you've got to have a plan, and you've got to have something that, provides direction and that you can check against, am I making progress in the direction that I want to be going? And I think just, being naive, and I was naive when I started my food business, we'll figure it out as we go. I think that's a common misstep as well.
Yeah.
And it happens a lot, especially at the farmers market level, because there are somewhat lower barriers to entry as a farmers market business than in, signing a lease and building out a kitchen and those kind of things. I think there's a tendency to say, oh, I can just shoot from the hip. I can I can shoestring this, and you'll just be happier if you take a breath, take a minute, study up a little bit, get some of those business basics down before you get started.
For sure.
Even for market managers, I think too, even if you're not buying packaging and all that stuff, if you're a market manager, you need to have a plan. You can't just say, oh, I want to have really low barrier to entry, or like let farmers come in for free just so I can start building it. Well, you can't build it for them if you're not bringing any income in, because you can't scale something that's nothing. Like
you're going to have overhead. You're going to have insurance. You're going to have permit fees yourself. If you're going to do it effectively, you're probably going to have some staff and people that can spend time on social media and things. And so saying, I'm doing farmers a favor by not charging them anything.
Not really, because your market's probably not going to survive, and then they are not going to have a place to sell, and then that's not serving them.
Right.
So just thinking about that big picture and that long run kind of plan, I think that's important. I really like what you said. You have to have a business model that works for you and makes money for you right now. Even if you have this goal to scale, you have to make it work right now. So
and it is, I mean, again, as somebody that owned a good food business, it's like there is this kind of like, well, one day we'll get to this point. And then it kind of plays into this like gambler's fallacy of like, you've already invested time, you've already invested money, and then it makes it a lot harder to decide when to quit. If you have been putting all this energy into like, well, one day we're going to be this, or one day it's going to turn around, or one day I'll be able to make this my full-time thing, or, if you're making money from the beginning and you know that is going to be able to sustain you, it kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like if your initial needs are met, you'll be able to make more logical decisions about like what's the next thing I should do. But if you're like from the get-go, like your needs aren't being met, you're just going to start like doing crazy willy-nilly things like, oh, well, maybe I should try this, or maybe I should try this. And all of a sudden you're just kind of spiraling.
You're out of cash, out of time. Not even like thinking of like, okay, when you need to quit, but like when you're like trajectory is going so fast, but you're not making any money. It's like, when do I need to scale back a little bit, get like professional help, like figure out, make a plan with somebody who knows how to make a plan, and kind of figure that out, and then take those baby steps forward, as opposed to trying to just like rocket into outer space with your scaling with no plan. I've just seen this happen with so many amazing farmers market vendor businesses that I just like cry thinking about they're not in the market anymore because they didn't take the time to recognize that. So important to remember.
So let's start talking about the solution a little bit, because we could.
We're all just crying.
We're all scared and concerned.
Yeah.
Right?
So, Sarah, one of the approaches that you have in your toolbox is this Profitfirst approach, which sounds great. So could you just tell us like a little bit about that and how you as a financial person came to that? Because obviously there's a lot of different philosophies out there. There's a lot of different ways to help people manage their budgets. But how did you come to this, and kind of like what is it?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that Profitfirst is a book. I'm not going to try to pronounce the gentleman's last name. His first name is Mike. There's lots of letters, consonants in his last name. But he is on a mission to end entrepreneurial poverty, right? Which is like a really strong statement. And, I had never worded it that way before, but basically we want entrepreneurs, we want business owners to get paid from their business. I think there's, when you talk about another like myth or a misstep out there, this belief that like, oh, well, I shouldn't make any money from my business for some number of years. Like, what is the point? Like when, then when, and how long are you supposed to suffer for? And are you supposed to have 2 jobs or 3 jobs, or like, what is the deal here? Right. So taking a profit first approach, he uses the word profit first, but really when I think about the strategy and the methods that he lays out in the book, it's about getting the business owner paid. It's about looking at your revenue and all of your expenses and examining them critically and saying, do I have enough money to go around to all of the places it needs to go? Right. And one of those places is what we call a profit bucket. That's what I call it. And that's money tucked aside for emergencies, right? So think about it like you're budgeting at home. Financial experts will always say you should have a few months worth of your expenses in the bank in case of an emergency, right? You get sick, you can't work, something happens, you can still pay your mortgage or your rent and feed yourself and your family. It's the same idea with a food business. You want to have a little bit of money tucked aside in case of emergency or to reinvest into your company at some point when you are ready to kind of take it to the next level or scale up a little bit. So profit is important. But we also want to make sure that the business owner is getting paid. Now, are you going to have your dream salary today? No, but we want there to be a certain percentage of what you're bringing in that is tucked aside for you as the business owner, so that you can take care of yourself, right? And so that you are being rewarded from this business. And if you have a plan, like we talked about before, you can see at what points in the plan you can give yourself a raise, right? And you can start paying yourself more. So I won't go through all of the details of it, but it's really about understanding the financials of your business, understanding how much money you need to make, how much money is appropriate to spend in each of the kind of major cost categories, and making sure that you can pay yourself. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and we tell people that, and you and I have talked about this on your podcast and some other places, but in Vendor 101, for instance, we have a quick feasibility kind of exercise that we have people do that lists what they're going to make and every expense associated with making it, and then what you can charge for it, and are those things matching up? Are you getting a margin? Are you going to have to reduce the cost of a certain ingredient to make it make sense? Or if some of those exercises yield the idea that this just doesn't work. It's not a viable business. And we're very insistent with people that they include paying the owner, paying the operator, that has to be as legitimate an expense of your bakery as buying flour. Because if you don't do that, you're quickly going to burn out. It's not a business. It's a hobby if you are not creating a product that involves paying the person operating the business. And I think you and I have been totally on the same wavelength about that. And it's amazing how many people say, well, I'm the owner and, I'll get paid later. Yeah, as you say, when? And is it a real business if you're not getting paid? And my contention is it's not. You do have to get paid to do what you do. And we actually apply the same thing to farmers market operators. And there are a lot of great farmers markets out there that are run strictly by volunteers, but we hear more and more and more that those volunteer operated markets, in the vast majority of cases, are cycling through managers and workers, because there's only so long that anybody can do anything for free. It also makes it less equitable because there's only a certain type of person that can afford to work for no income. So it's, you're ruling out a lot of people for whom work is how they feed themselves and their families. So we just think it's really important. So do you have sort of a distilled message that you would give to a farmers market manager or operator, even if they're under a nonprofit organization that thinks that their business shouldn't make money?
I mean, a distilled message is that if you are a business, you need to make money. Yeah. Period. Yeah. Period. I don't know how much more distilled we could get than that. If you are, even if you're a charity, right? If you're a nonprofit, like it takes money to operate things. And I think what you mentioned about equity and being equitable, like so many thoughts swirling through my head here. But if you are a business, in the most basic terms, you must make money, right? You must have revenue and you must have profits because you need them to succeed. You need them to grow. You need to have that safety net. So if things go bonkers like they did during COVID, you've got money in the bank to help you to, get the wash stations and all of the things that I'm sure cost money. I think I might not be able to verbalize this well, and maybe you can help me with this, Kat, but I think, capitalism is something that is looked at very negatively, right? We can do good within a capitalist structure and we can do bad within that structure. And I think a mental shift that I have made is that, I don't think in my lifetime capitalism is going to go away. But how can I utilize it for good, for my good, for the good of the community, for the good of the farmers? And I think if we start thinking about that and having that conversation, maybe we can make some progress. But we have to get rid of the idea that making money is a bad thing, and start thinking about all the good things we could do by making money.
I like the way you're characterizing it. I mean, you are right. Capitalism isn't going to go away. Our responsibility, if we're trying to improve things, is to redefine how capitalism works. No, you shouldn't be making money by being exploitative of the people that work for you, or taking advantage of people's uncontrollable life situations to gouge them on, a product that's absolutely necessary to life and liberty. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to figure out how a product can be made, benefiting the person that's making it so that they can make a living and do all the things they need to do to have a rich life and still provide an attractive or necessary product to the people that are consuming it it all goes around. You're right. It's hard to articulate, but I think we're going the same direction. It's not a shameful thing to get paid for doing what you do. That's just kind of how we're set up.
Especially, as a market manager, you are responsible for providing real value to a lot of people, right? So you should be compensated for that. Your team should be compensated for that. And you all mentioned this earlier. If the market makes money, they could spend that money on marketing the market, right? Broadening the reach, really making the market more beneficial for all of its participants, and then in turn, their customers as well. And I think transparency could be helpful in this process, right? If people really know what goes into making a product or what goes into putting on a market, then they understand, oh, this is why I have to pay a market booth fee, or this is why I'm paying, $10 for a hot sauce, because this is how it all breaks down. And oh, by the way, the owner of the business gets to take a tiny percentage for all of their hard work in creating this product, so.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's not it's not an easy thing to articulate, and it's not an easy thing to explain. I know that we've talked about how market managers who have to present a budget to a board of directors need to phrase that and explain that doing good can mean doing well, and that's okay, that there's nothing wrong with actually bringing in an income. Or, if at the very end of your bottom line you're supposed to be nonprofit, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that the people working to create this operation shouldn't get paid. That's a legitimate expense that goes towards that zero bottom line that you're aiming for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. That's a lot. But we also, I think we have just a couple more minutes, and we wanted to ask you, just because you did bring up kind of having an emergency bank and having, something that if, things will go, when the caca hits the fan, you have some money saved away that you can, keep yourself afloat. And we have been noticing with COVID, and that really shook up world events and the food industry, and then blockchain issues, spikes in gas prices. That is one. The gas prices specifically is really, really hitting our farmers right now that are having to take those big trucks and vans to the market each week, and they have big commutes and lots of crews and stuff like that. So have you seen these things reflected in your clients' businesses, and how do you do you have any tips for like adjusting your budgets for these prices that kind of seem to continue to go up? Like, how do you break the news to your clients that those things might not go away?
And how do you plan for that and pivot your plan?
Yeah,
such a good question. So, it is common practice for us, for my clients, and for most of the people in our group, our coaching group, to track your expenses regularly. And I can't stress this enough. You should have a spreadsheet of the things that you buy, right? So if you are buying ingredients, food ingredients, track what those cost over time. And you can be super detailed, like I would be, right? Different tab for different months and all of that kind of stuff. Or you can just keep it updated, right? And have those, I'm going to nerd out a little bit on Excel on you, but like have those linked to your recipes, right? So on one page, you've got your costs for all of your ingredients. On another page, you've got your recipes. And so when you update those prices, you can literally in as real time as possible, see how that's affecting your product and see how that's affecting your margins. That's critical. And that should be happening no matter what is going on in the economy and around the world, right? That's just smart, financials for your business. I think the other thing is that when you should know what your minimum margin is with which you can succeed financially. Right. So you might be operating, let's just say, with a 60% gross profit margin, and that's a comfortable place for you to be. And you might know that your bottom edge is 52%. And so you might be able to hold your prices steady where they are until you hit that edge, until you hit that 52%. And then you've got to make some critical decisions. But all the while you see that margin dropping, critical thinking, but looking at your financials critically to say, do we need to raise our price, or are there other changes within our business that we can make where we can hold the price for our customers who I know are experiencing price increases everywhere and still survive as a business? And those are things like, can we do things more efficiently, right? So like these changes internally that might allow you to keep your price where it's at. But at the end of the day, you might need to raise your price, and that is also okay. I was meeting with someone who's doing like hourly consults with me yesterday. And she said, yeah, prices have really gone up. And so I definitely need to raise my prices. And I was like, okay, let's look at it. And then she just slipped in there that her prices hadn't gone up in 3 years. Right. So I think that, and I share that story because it's not uncommon that many of you listening have not raised your prices in a really, really long time. And now that the blockchain issues, the rising gas prices, just the so-called inflation, things are going up, that now is really a good time to examine and to provide a price increase. There's a lot less pushback with that right now. But I think, the simple answer is stay in touch with your numbers, know what your costs are, know what your bottom line, kind of margin, that bottom edge is, and just make decisions that are not based on your emotions as best you can.
Yeah. And that's really good advice too for market operators. If you haven't raised your booth fee in a few years, as the season wraps up, the summer season, it might be time to reevaluate that. Is there room for, or is there a need for you to increase your fees next year?
Yeah. I think that's definitely something to look at. We've gone years without increasing fees, especially because of COVID protocols and that kind of thing. I think everybody sort of stopped for a minute, but our expenses have gone up.
Yeah.
Our insurance is higher than it used to be. Salaries and wages have gone up for everybody.
Which is wonderful.
Which is great. Yeah. And if the price increase is incremental and it applies to every one of the vendors in your market, that can add up to enough money to do some wonderful things.
Increase their sales.
Yeah.
So it turns into a circular kind of motion where everyone's being lifted up by it. And I think breaking it down for them, especially if you're doing an increase, either with selling an item and increasing the price to your customers, or as a market manager, increasing the rent fees. I think just having that conversation about, hey, our expenses have gone up as well. We want to offer this better product, or we want to, make sure the market is running, as best we can so that those extra customers are coming in to buy your product. Kind of just having it more of a community conversation as opposed to, like you're saying, like not making it feel like a gouging situation or something that's unethical. Just understanding about that part about business.
The more education people have, the better.
Yeah.
You have any, so kind of to wrap up, you've been in the food industry for a long time in a lot of different roles. any trends, any predictions for the next few years, this next little time? Things have been so stirred up. It's
I know.
it could be anything. But what are you seeing through that crystal ball over there?
Yeah, I'm going to share what I hope I'm seeing in my crystal ball. And one of those things is sort of a shift from, organic certification is a great thing, right? But sustainable, regenerative, those types of stamps on a product, I want the consumer to continue to ask questions about where their food comes from, to continue to ask questions about, and I'll call them out, why does Tyson's, executives, why are they making X amount of billions of dollars every year while their employees are struggling? Whom else can I support instead and pay a higher price for my chicken, but know exactly where that money is going and that it's within my community? I think that COVID did stir up supply chain issues and concerns about going to grocery stores that drove people to buy local. We had farmers locally who had to stop taking on new customers and say, listen, our meat in particular is only available to people who are already on our mailing list, and you all are getting a code, and we're going to make sure that you are taken care of first. And I know that has sort of backed off a little bit, but I hope that some percentage of our shoppers are going to continue to learn about where their food comes from and want to support local smaller businesses who are really doing good. That's, I think, the trend that I hope to see. And I think too, fair prices in the market, right? So yes, again, Tyson, right? Their executives are making billions of dollars, but they're not paying their people well. They're not paying their farmers well. So we still have an underpriced or an artificially low priced product in the grocery store, which is a hard thing for people to understand and a difficult thing to even talk about here. But I've been thinking about it a lot, and so I'm sharing it here. I hope that people begin to understand that, and that we can help people understand what the true cost of food is, just to sort of drive that bigger goal of spending our money in the right places and really lifting up the good food businesses that we're talking about and that farmers markets support. That is what I want to happen in the food industry.
That's
Amen.
That's where we're all heading. We're all heading there. And it means voting for the people that will support those kind of policies that are, rather than subsidizing highly processed foods or big ag, will support small farmers. So keep an eye on your farm bill. And the nice thing about farmers markets is that you don't need a label like certified organic or any of those kind of labels to know how your food is produced. You can actually talk to the people that produce it. So it's always amazing. Sarah, it's always amazing to talk to you. We'll do it again. And hope to see you soon somewhere on this podcast or on yours or out in the big wide world. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I had such a great time.
Bye.
Lovely to see you.
Bye, Sarah.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today, and big thanks to Gusto for supporting farmers markets, farmers, and food makers by making payroll, HR, and benefits easy and affordable. Find more information and sign up by clicking the Gusto logo on the resource page at farmersmarketpros.com.
Farmers markets are all about connection, and all of us, operators, farmers, and vendors, keep learning. Connect with people just like you from various parts of the country and share what's happening in your area in the terrific conversations over in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community. If you're actively involved in a farmers market, please find us there, answer the 3 qualifying questions, and join the group. You can also message us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros or email us at connect@farmersmarketpros.com. If you're looking for further education, check out our online course offerings at farmersmarketpros.com. Thanks for listening to Tent Talk. Please leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you access your podcasts, and tell us and others how you're enjoying Tent Talk. And be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is proudly produced by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Today's episode was recorded and edited by Justine Marzoni-Mead. Original music by David Mead. Thank you so much for listening today, and we'll have another great episode next week, so tune in.